Why did Sequoia come and give you $50 million?
They invested before we had AI. We had like maybe 5,000 people using Warp.
Was it like $50 million when you had 5,000?
Yeah.
What?
Today's guest not only left Google, but even stepped down as interim CTO at Time to start Warp, a company that's solving one of the most painful problems in software engineering by fixing the old, outdated terminal. In this conversation, Zack Lloyd breaks down how Warp started, how he raised $50 million from Sequoia, even when he had only 5,000 users, what he thinks about the future of software engineering, the hacks and strategies behind fast-growing SaaS companies in 2025, and much more.
What happened after AI? When was the inflection point on growth?
Our growth just started going crazy to the point where we were adding like $1 million in new revenue every week.
Wow. Has that growth broken things at the company?
Crazy problem that I think a lot of AI companies have, where we've had a lot of like fraud and abuse, costing us, over $1 million a month.
You spend more on OpenAI or Anthropic? So ladies and gentlemen, I've been hearing of this super fast growing company called Warp. And Zack, you were the CEO of Warp. I remember the time where 3 or 4 years ago, SaaS was this totally different beast, right? And we were running a SaaS company 4 or 5 years ago where, we'd build software, people would come in, spend a little bit of money. And SaaS, there used to be this thing about, hey, you're going to grow 3x in the first year, 3x in the second year, 2x in year 3, and 2x in year 4. But today's SaaS companies are totally different, right? And I assume the fact that you've raised $50 million from Sequoia and growing like a rocket ship means there's some magic going on. And I wanted to actually tease out that magic, figure out who's your customer, how are you growing so fast, what is the secret, what can I take away, what can the audience learn, all of it in one conversation. So thank you so much for doing this. And I see the OpenAI trillion token plaque behind you, so congratulations on that. You spend more on OpenAI or Anthropic?
We spend more on Anthropic, but it's always changing.
And they haven't given you anything?
They actually did give me something. I haven't put it up yet. I should put it up. They gave me some. They're kind of like book holders. But no, I didn't get like a cool like 10 trillion token plaque or whatever we've spent with them.
I want to tell you how I discovered Warp. It's a very interesting story. So we run a company, and we have one unit in the company, which is the game development unit. We're working on a game, and I was walking past one of my developers there, and he was using this tool called Warp, right? And he was just like typing plain English and just giving it a bunch of tasks that we would typically run terminal commands for, right? And I was just looking at him and I was like, hey, where did you discover this? Where do you find this? It was like, somebody told me about this. And I was like, where did that person find about it? He's like, I have no idea, but this is useful and I use it every day. And I was like, it's just incredible, because if you went back 10 years ago in India, right, in a country like India, we were reasonably slow to adopt software, right? You would still find Indians using some sort of SaaS that was sold to the Indian company by some representative, like if it was Adobe, right? There would be some rep in India making sure that the Indian company bought it. But like now we're seeing everything happen bottoms up, right? We're having these, people in companies saying, hey, this is the tool of choice. I found it online, and it's AI, it's helping me with my workflows, so I want to get on top of it. So I want to know, how long has Warp been around? What did you guys start with? And where did AI come into the mix?
Yeah, great question. So we're a 5-year-old company, so we actually predate AI. And the original sort of product vision was, let's make a more modern, usable version of the command line terminal. My background I've been an engineer for a really long time. I used to be a principal engineer at Google. I've always used the terminal. I've never really enjoyed using the terminal. I think it's kind of like a pain in the ass, frankly, but I've always worked with other engineers who are really good at using it. And so the original concept was like, can we just make something that gives that power that, engineers who really master the terminal have to normal engineers? And so that was the original vision. We actually, from a business perspective, the goal was really like, or the way that we thought about it was like, hey, this is a valuable piece of developer real estate, meaning like it's one of, there's probably only 2 tools that every developer uses every day, which is the terminal and the code editor. And I was very confident that we could build a product that would make the terminal like experience more powerful and more usable. So we kind of bet on that, and built for a couple of years. Our original like plan for business model was going to be around collaboration, meaning like, I don't know if are you familiar with Postman? Do you know that tool?
Yeah, it's from
like
India,
API
actually.
development.
Yeah, Postline's
Okay.
from India. Yeah.
So the original sort of business plan was like let people sort of share templated terminal commands or like notebooks through the terminal. And we actually have that, and it is useful, but the business totally changed, and we changed the product a ton when yeah, actually we even started putting AI in work before ChatGPT came out. We had a feature where you could just kind of type commands in English and translate them to command language. But when ChatGPT came out, we realized, hey, this technology is like super applicable to the terminal, where the biggest problem is like it's super powerful, but you can never remember how to use it. And so we kind of went all in on that relatively quickly. And at this point, the way to conceive of Warp is kind of like what you said, where it's like a general interface for developers where they can just tell their computer what to do, and they can tell the computer in terminal commands, or they can tell it in English. And if you tell it in English, it does it agentically, which is like, it's pretty magical. It's like science fiction. It's very cool.
Yeah, I can imagine. When I was young, I used to actually, we used to write Ruby on Rails, right? About 10 years ago. And I just remember every time you wanted like to run a server, right? We used to use something called Puma back then. It would be like, hey, what was the command? I forgot it. And then I would go, and then I had this cheat sheet that I'd set up for myself. So I'm glad that, life's gotten easier now. Can you tell me, and I want to sort of break down the dynamics of SaaS here, right, for a second, before we get into, more, I just want to break down why did Sequoia come and give you $50 million? What point did that happen? Was that after the AI wave? Was that before the AI wave? What was the trigger for them? And can you run me through that conversation? Like, what's that conversation like?
I'll run you through it because it's probably interesting for other founders. They invested before we had AI in the product, which is crazy, actually, in retrospect. They invested actually when we had very few users. Even we had like maybe 5,000 people using Warp, and
So
now
did they
we're
put in
getting up
$50
close to like
million?
a million.
Was it like $50 million
Yeah,
when you had 5,000? What?
yeah,
Like, is
it's
that a
crazy,
Silicon
right?
Valley thing?
So I guess like here's how I think of it. So the sequencing of fundraising for us, which is probably interesting. So we raised a seed round, or I should just say I raised a seed round before we had any product. I'm a second time founder. Um, uh, I have like a background that I think VCs like, right? Just from someone who was running Google Docs. So I was able to raise capital pretty early, and then we, as part of that seed round, had some really cool angel investors come in. One of whom is the founder and CEO of Figma, Dylan Field, and he like loved what we were doing and loved like the development of the product and the early signals we were getting from customers. And so actually he led our Series A, and then not long after he led our Series A, he introduced me to Andrew Reed, who's the partner at Sequoia, who backed us, who we weren't seeking funding. In fact, we weren't seeking funding at the A either. He just liked the concept of a lot. And I think he did some amount of pattern matching where he's like, good team building a really, really hard app. So one thing is like what we're doing is pretty technically hard to do. And a potentially very, very big market, and like kind of a weird, unorthodox, wild bet to make. And he just was like, I guess he really liked us and wanted to be involved and invested before AI. And so, it was before we had a lot of users, and it was way before we had any revenue. Like our revenue growth has really started to like take off in like a crazy way this year. So, and this was like 2023. So it was just like a crazy investment that they made, but I really appreciate the bet that they took. It was cool.
And what happened after AI? When was the inflection point on growth? Because I assume a lot of what we've heard was very recent.
Yeah, so I'll give you just like some stats. This stuff's kind of public. So going into like May of this year, we were at like $1 million in ARR, so not very high. And then we repositioned as like an environment that was all around agentic development. We call it agentic development environment in June, and our growth just started going crazy to the point where we were adding like $1 million in new revenue every week. We're now like into the double digits of ARR. It's like, and it's all happened in 4 or 5 months, which is is pretty cool. It's created a bunch of problems, just to be clear. But it's also it's really exciting to have worked on something for, we spent a long time building the foundations of this app, just try to make an incredible product experience, to go from something that was like growing like okay, like we were monetizing it, to something that like really exploded in revenue very quickly, was a really neat experience. And it was, like you said, I think it's like it's something that can happen in part because of AI, and just like the way that a user, if you're using Warp before AI, you're like, this is a much nicer terminal experience. It's cool. Maybe it makes me like 30% more productive. If you use Warp with AI, it can make you like 5 times more productive or something. It's like a crazy, crazy value add. So it's been wild.
Can you tell me what are the top 2 or 3 use cases that other people are seeing? Like what are the top use cases that developers are seeing that you think Warp really serves? Like I'm sure you have power use cases. What are the top ones out there?
Yeah, so Warp is good for many, many things. So we are a great coding agent, and there are many people who use it like instead of using Claude Code or Cursor, Gemini, or something like that. So we're very, very good at that. We've consistently been one of the top coding agents on SweBench and on Terminal Bench. And so just like if you want a great coding agent with a very, very native feeling UI, because like, again, like we aren't a fork of VS Code or just a text-based app. We're like this app that's built that really to support the agentic workflow. It's very good for that. But the other thing that's like killer in Warp is that you can use it for all of the non-coding use like tasks. So if you want to use it to like set up a new project, and in the past you'd be like, how the hell do I get all these like dependencies installed? And it's like it starts breaking and your environment variables are wrong and all that shit. Warp's incredible for that. If you want to deploy it and start doing work that's more like in production, like with your cloud, I think Warp is really differentiated. And again, because it's like grown out of the terminal, is incredible for those kinds of use cases. So definitely far better than our competitors for doing stuff like that. So, it's great for coding, but we can do everything across the whole software lifecycle.
Interesting. How do engineers end up discovering Warp? Is it that they round robin through multiple ADEs, or not just ADEs, but do you think they look at Cursor and then say, hey, I'm looking for an alternative specifically for term? They're like, how's the discovery here?
Yeah, I think it depends. So, because we sort of predated AI, we have a lot of people who came to Warp for a better terminal experience. So that was the initial draw. In fact, we have a lot of users in India, actually. India, in terms of usage, is one of our top markets. I don't actually know how people in India are finding it. Like the US and Europe are our biggest ones. I think, initially it was like, the first day we launched, we got like 10,000 signups because we were on Hacker News. And so just like places where developers hang out, they would see Warp and try and come and check it out. And then I think after that, a big thing for us has been just word of mouth. Like if you want to grow amongst developers, I think first and foremost, you have to have a product that they really like. Does that make sense to you? Just like the product has to be useful. And then, we've gotten a little bit more mature at marketing as we've gone. We only have like a 5-person marketing team, but like, our YouTube, for instance, has 100,000 subscribers on it, which puts us as one of the top 10 developer companies in the world when it comes to YouTube, which is crazy. We're not a big company. We're a 50-person company. So I think, and it demos really well. So when you see Warp, you're like, what is that? Like, is that a terminal? Like, but looks kind of like an IDE. And so, all those things have helped us get awareness. But honestly, it's a struggle. Like one of the biggest struggles if you're building a startup is just like, how do you get people to know about you? I'm sure you know that from starting companies. Like, that's one of the hardest pieces.
Yeah, I think, the thing about going after developers and doing dev tools is that developers are the internet's early adopter crowd, right? So if you see all the super fast growing, even for ChatGPT, right? Like in the very early days, like when they just dropped in like late 2022, all the early adopters were engineers who said, can I use this to write code? Can I use this in some way to make myself more productive, right? So I feel that at least with Cursor and Windsurf, and even you guys to a big extent, it's this early adopter community that says, let me just try new stuff. And because you demo so well, right? And all these tools that demo really well, where you're looking at it, well, that's magic, right? I think you guys have all seen amazing growth. Has that growth broken things at the company? Like, did you expect it? Like, how did things change internally when you started seeing growth?
Oh, it's broken a ton of stuff. So the vibe before the growth was like, um, let's like get things just right and like let's like have a more process or whatever. And then the vibe after the growth has been like, shit, we have like 200 support emails we have to answer. Like, how do we find someone to help us do that as fast as we can? Or like, we had this crazy problem that I think a lot of AI companies have, where we've had a lot of like fraud and abuse to the tune of like costing us, over $1 million a month of just people finding ways to create fake free user accounts to abuse our AI. And so it's like, we have to fix that. That's like that's a lot of money for us. And so all these things that we didn't foresee as priorities became priorities as we started growing. Another big one, which like I think is interesting to talk about, is just like, this AI-based tools do not have the same margin profile as like your traditional SaaS tool, where it's like a 90% gross margin. Like, this stuff costs us a ton of money to provide, and so we've had to do a ton of work to try to get to a pricing model that's actually doesn't lose us money and it's sustainable. And so that's like another thing that's been like, it's just like it's a whole different. It doesn't matter when you're at $1 million of scale. It matters when you're at like 10, 20x or whatever that scale, to get the unit economics of the thing right.
That brings me to a follow-up question with SaaS, right? Like, you hit the nail on the head that SaaS now sees a lot more growth than it saw 3 or 4 years ago, right? But at the same time, I think the unit economics have fundamentally become very different, because SaaS was always seen as, you build software, you have incredible margins, your cost of creating that extra unit is zero or close to zero. So you're able to mass produce software, deliver it to everybody else, and you walk away into the sunset with these huge margin businesses. But with AI, because you're fundamentally dependent on tokens, right? From OpenAI or Anthropic or somebody else, and you have a cost of this inference, right? They have a cost of inference that they're passing on to you. And even if you end up building your own model tomorrow, you still have that cost of inference. Now, the hope is that over time, the cost of inference drops very hard, and the margins recover. But do you think that the unit economics for AI SaaS companies are sustainable? How do you see that play out?
Yeah, I think right now it's really expensive, because you have to be at the frontier of these models to offer the best experience, right? So even right now, if you look at any like fixed level of intelligence with these models, the cost per token is dropping super fast. Like it's dropped by like multiple orders of magnitude if you were to look at like a model from a year ago or whatever. The problem is, right, and that would lead to margin profiles that actually look like traditional SaaS. The problem is, at the moment, to be competitive, you need to be at the frontier, and the frontier cost per token hasn't really changed much. And it's very, very expensive. So my thought is that, depending on the application over time, the bet that we're making is that you probably don't need to be at the frontier. In fact, even for coding right now, it's like, let's say the difference between Sonnet 4 and Sonnet 4.5, it's legit. Like, there's a difference, but like on the evals, it's like a 2 or 3% difference. And so if the marginal difference between the frontier model and like the next 2 or 3 models down is not such a big deal in the future, then actually you're not going to want to be a model company. If they can maintain that big difference, then they're sort of sitting pretty. So I think the app layer is going to be where it's at. I mean, I'm biased, just to be very clear. Like, we have an app business, but it reminds me a little bit of like, there was a point in time when like Oracle was like the database you had to use. It's like, that's done. Like, that's not true anymore. Like, you can use Postgres, you can use MySQL. And so I think if you look at what the model providers are doing, which is like, they are very, very aggressively moving into the app layer, I think it's out of like concern that like, is a model API business truly like a defensible thing in the long run? And I don't know, my take is I don't think it is, but like, again, I'm biased.
I agree with you. In fact, I put out a tweet a long time ago about the fact that the right way to look at many of these model providers is like PostgreSQL, right? Or MySQL, because it's almost like, when I was very young and I first became an engineer, I was really worried about, should I use this for my database? Should I go NoSQL? But then over time, I just realized it doesn't really matter. It's like a choice preference sort of thing. And it's almost like, till today, I don't know if I've ever paid for MySQL. Like, it's almost like when you set up something like a WordPress, it comes free, right?
Yeah.
If you want to set up PG, it's sort of, you can just do it, right? You can just download it if you need to. I can't remember paying for it. It's almost like it got abstracted away, right? Even if somebody else was hosting it, I probably paid for it as a packaged sort of deal. But I can't remember explicitly and separately paying for it. So I feel like the same thing's going to happen to the models. But the only question is, if you have to pay that token cost, are your margins going to be something on top of this? Because I assume the way you're billing is tokens plus a margin. Are you also billing a subscription separately?
Yeah, so we just changed our billing, and I think it's interesting to talk about. So what we're doing now, and then I'll tell you what we were doing. So what we're doing now is like, there's a low price subscription, I think relatively low price, like $20 a month. It comes with some amount of AI. And then after that, you basically pay, it's consumption-based pricing, usage-based pricing on top of that. So if you want more AI, you buy more credits. The more credits that you buy, the bigger discount you get. And that ensures that like, we're not losing money. And then we also offer something that we will let people do the base subscription and then bring their own API key, which is interesting. So if people don't want to buy the tokens through us, we're okay with that. Like, I basically want developers to do what works for them. And so but they still have to subscribe. So it's still, and the margin profile of that is much more like a traditional $20 a month SaaS business, because it's like a good gross margin for us. The way that we were doing it up until a week ago was we had these like fixed request subscription plans. So we had like a $20 a month plan, a $50 a month plan, and a $225 a month plan. And you would get, as part of that, a certain number of like credits, essentially. And that model wasn't working. So the problem, I mean, it was working from the consumer perspective. They were like, this is great, because that's how they like want to buy it, but they're used to it. But from us, the problem was, to make money on that kind of model, you were incentivized to have people use it less. So like, the people who we made money from on the $225 a month model didn't use it. And that's like a horrible incentive. Like, we want to build something that's super useful for people. And so to get the incentives right, I think for AI companies that have a variable cost where tokens is the dominating thing, you probably have to do some sort of consumption thing. Or even better, if you could do some sort of outcome-based thing, but that's not really, it's hard to measure outcomes in developer productivity right now.
And people are always going to lie about outcomes, right? Like, it's very hard to track it. Like, there's incentive not to tell people what the outcomes are when the outcomes actually happen.
Yep.
Hey, so a question here, right? Play this out over the future for me. Play this out over the next 3 or 4 years. Because look, there's a camp that believes that a lot of writing code itself might be automated, right? The vibe coding camp, which is press a button, everything gets done. There is the assisted coding camp, which is that, a cursor or, a warp, and all these tools are going to help me become a 10x or a 100x engineer. The goal, if you look at the explicitly stated goal of an OpenAI or an XAI or Anthropic, their eventual goal is, well, we want to automate writing code, because if you want AGI to come about, you need software to be able to write other software, right? Firstly, I want to know, because you've done, of course, Google Docs, right? And you have a long history being a software engineer. I want to know your thoughts on how you see this evolve, which camp you're in, or maybe there's a third camp I don't know about. And how is WAP going to stay relevant across this? Because I assume you're going to build more, right, to enable more of this.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So the way that I see it developing is there's 3 phases to it in my opinion. So there's what I did for most of my career was like write software by hand. I think that's ending. And the next phase of that is like writing software by prompt. And that's like, has 2 parts to it. So there's like the part that is what looks like Warp today, where you sit down as a developer and you're like, literally type or talk to Warp and say like, build me this feature, fix this bug. And you sit there and watch it work, and you like collaborate with it and review its code and all of that. And I think that I think actually we're still at the beginning of the adoption of that, despite all the hype that you see. Like it's going to take a while for developers, especially on pro, like big code bases, to get to a point where they're fully working by prompt. But then the other thing that's happening is automating parts of development, and I fully think that's going to happen too. And so what I mean by that is like, can you build something where every time a PR gets submitted, there's an agent that goes and updates your documentation to match the new user experience? Or can you have something where every time there's a server that crashes, you have an agent that goes and investigates and fixes like the crash for you? And so at Warp, like we're trying to invest in both of those. So I don't think the interactive part of it is going away anytime soon, but I do think the automated part is coming and is a real thing. My guess is like 3 or 4 years from now, it's like you as a developer working on a real code base are spending some portion of your time still like doing this interactive thing, but an increasing portion of your time is like managing or observing or orchestrating what a bunch of these automated agents are doing. And that's like a crazy future. But I think that's what's happening. So automation is a real thing for sure.
I have said this before, right? Like I've gone in public and said that, this might be the future of software, because we don't know, nobody knows what the future is going to be, but we speculate on this. And looking at everything from, agent GPT many years in the past to everything that's going on with Codex and you guys, it is certain that we will be the orchestrator. We'll be the manager of these bots going off, writing, code, putting out a PR, and then it's our job to sort of orchestrate all of this, right? But this is a scary thing for, let's say, a 22-year-old engineer to listen to. Because,
Totally.
They spent 4 years, at least in India, studying computer science, learning that, hey, I've got to write every single line of code. I've got to make sure I know all the, algorithms, like the top algorithms being used. I need to know bubble sort at the back of my head. And then suddenly here's this bot that can do a lot of that straight up. And the engineer is like, well, is my core competence becoming a man? I never signed up to be a manager, right? I enjoy the creative act of writing code, of solving problems. And of course, they're actually two different things, writing code and solving problems, but most people conflate the two, especially in India, right? Do you think we're stealing away agency from some of these engineers to do this? Or should they just make peace with the fact that they're going to be a manager of these agents?
It's a super interesting question. My take is like, I guess there's a few questions in there. So my take is like, it's actually very exciting from the standpoint of, as an individual, the amount of cool shit that I'm going to be able to build is going to be exponentially higher because of this technology. So if my real interest is in like, I want to build deeply useful software for some customer or end user,
but that's
I'm going to be able.
But that's entrepreneurship, right? But that's more entrepreneurship.
So, okay, so sorry.
The problem with that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, the problem with that is entrepreneurship also has this implicit assumption that you're now going to have to go sell and market and build a business and raise money if needed and all of those things. What if I just want to be an engineer for somebody else?
That's interesting. So I've I've been like an engineer for.
Or maybe it's a cultural thing, right? Maybe in India, like, in India, we find safety in jobs, right? Like, there's a $250 billion IT industry here, where we do software services exports to the US and other countries. It sort of holds the fort, and a lot of people have their jobs there. The minute you tell people, well, you'll still use the same skill and you have these tools to do things faster, but now you have to take the risk of starting your own thing, that scares a lot of people. Right? Everybody wants to be a software engineer and also sell their own software, be like Peter Levels and Indie Hack and whatnot. But it's also, there's so much risk in that it scares people a little bit. Maybe American, the rest of the world has a slightly different culture. I'd like to hear that, that parallel though.
Yeah. So my sense is, let's put aside the founding thing for a second. I'm obviously like, I'm super into building new things, but like, I was a software engineer at Google for a long time, where my job was, build this product, Google Sheets, build this product, Google Docs. Even if that were my job, I still would like to have a bunch of tools to let me do it faster and better, and especially take away like the annoying parts of it. And so the annoying parts of it to me were like shit, there's some like, I'm trying to get this project set up so I can even start coding, or like, I don't understand how this new code base works. And so even if your job is not like, you're not out there like net creating some new software, and you view yourself as an engineer as more like, I'm going to be like, I'm going to get tickets that I want to like build and bugs that I want to fix. I still think having this new technology is going to be on the balance kind of cooler, not worse. Um, but the second thing I would say is like, if it's not like you're gonna not be doing engineering either. So like an analogy that I would use is something like, you should still do the 4-year CS degree. You should still learn how computers work. You should still learn how code works. Just in the same way, it's like, as a kid, I'm like learning like long division or whatever, but then I'm like not doing that. I'm like using a calculator. But there's huge value in if you want to like be at all in the world of building software and understand how this stuff works. And like, I don't know, I tend to think that it's not a zero sum game, if you know what I mean by that, where I don't see the fact that you're going to be able to automate a bunch more of this as meaning that people aren't going to have jobs as engineers, if that's like a concern for people. I just think there's like this infinite demand for software in the world. And so even as the tools improve, the amount of software that we'll want to build will improve. But like you obviously have a super strong take on this. I'm curious like where your head is at on all these changes.
There is a satisfaction that I used to get as an engineer when I was much younger, right? And I'd write code, I'd solve a problem. Like I remember, when I was 20 or something like that, I was solving the problem of, I was building, like when I was 19, I was building on Ruby on Rails, we were building a job platform, right? So there's so many problems, right? Simple stuff like, hey, we want to, and this was a very different time, right? So this was a time in India, we didn't have Stripe, we didn't have Razorpay, we didn't have a payment gateway. So you had to work with the bank, get the payment gateway. Like they'd specifically sit with you and help you implement. They didn't have like a ready to go SDK. It's almost like you're working with them to implement a payment gateway, right? So solving problems back then was like, you needed creativity. You needed to find a hack almost everywhere, right? And you need to understand how it worked. But today,
fun to write the code. Yeah,
it's fun to write the code. Today, but we're sitting on under a layer of abstraction, right? And I deeply value that because at the company we still build software, right? We recently built our own video suite, right? To just manage thousands of videos. It's almost like we built a Git for video internally, but it's gotten so much easier. Right? And there's so much abstraction for us to sit on top of, and now AI is this new abstraction that makes life even easier. So I feel it has taken out a little bit of the creativity and the fun of being an engineer, but you're right in the sense that it makes you far more productive. We can build more software faster, and I know I can absorb that risk as an entrepreneur, and I enjoy that because now it's more about, can we build the thing quick and while it's still stable and useful and valuable to the end customer, but can we build it fast because expenses, right? Like the longer it goes, the more expensive it is. So that way, I'm super.
Listen, do you take more joy in the like writing of the code and getting the code to work, or in the like product that the code produces? Because to me, I get the joy of writing the code. It's super fun. It's like solving a puzzle. But the thing that I always like the most, and I think there's actually a divide in engineers on this, I like seeing the working product. And so I find that to be like the coolest thing about engineering is like.
No, me too.
Is like, okay, yeah.
I love the end product, right? But I would say that's true today because I run a company and I want to make sure that things happen quickly because you were always thinking runway. But I feel like sometimes when I talk to young engineers, they almost feel like it's a little bit purposeless, right? Like I'm just writing prompts.
Oh.
Like you'll see this conversation on art Twitter, right? On art Twitter, it's almost like an artist would come out and say, you're just writing a prompt, you're not doing real art, right? So a person doing, writing a prompt and making art is always feeling a little bit worse about themselves that, I'm producing cool stuff, but, I don't have the satisfaction that other artists might have. So this question of craft versus outcome is something where maybe what you're saying is the craft is still there, but it's abstracted to more of management and ideas and direction. But the outcome still matters, right? You're still judged, whether it's human made, whether it's AI made, you're still judged. Your product is still judged versus everybody else's product. Your piece of art is still judged versus everybody else's piece of art on its own merit. So I fully hear you. Do you think that means that a country like India needs to be slightly more entrepreneurial then? Like, or just generally countries that are more interested in just saying, hey, I write this many lines of code, this is my job. Do you think they should start, those sort of people should start being a little more entrepreneurial, thinking a lot more about outcome?
I mean, I'm all in on outcome, and I've always kind of been this way. So to me, it's like, what's the point of writing code, right? The point of writing code is that you're solving some problem for some user, and that has some economic value. And like, if you are a engineer and you're conceiving of your job as like anything but that, I think you're going to have a problem in the future, is my opinion. So it's like you can't, you kind of like, it's like if you want to be like a car mechanic or something, but the whole point is like you got to build something that gets people from A to B. And so it's like I don't I find that the way the engine works is cool, but like what matters is like the actual value it provides. So if I were like running a consultancy in India where the idea has been like we're going to provide code building services, I would change that idea extremely quickly to being like we're going to provide software that solves a business problem, and like we're going to have to get everyone who's working at that consultancy on that same page as quickly as possible, that it's the outcome that matters. Now I will say this, like I don't think we're at the point with these agents where you can afford to write professional software only caring about the outcome. In fact, I think that's a real anti-pattern. The agents aren't smart enough. And so if that's your approach, if like, and you're working on a real software project, you're going to end up with an agent writing code that is like not mergeable or has security holes or, causes crashes. And so I think you have to like take into account that part of getting to the right outcome is doing good engineering still. But I'm always working backwards from like, what's the economic value of the thing you're doing? And that's just like how the world works, for better or worse. Is like, it's the incentives are like to build useful stuff, and everything has to flow backwards from that. Agree or disagree? I'm curious. Like,
No, I have a term for this, right? Like you can say that there's now this new movement of vibe coding. I actually think there are two kinds of vibe coders. Somebody who is actually a software engineer who knows what he's doing and then can walk in and fix things if there's something that goes wrong. And then there's the other side, which I call blind coding, right? It's the evil sister of vibe coding, where somebody has no software engineering fundamentals, has never done it in the past, and is saying, look, I'm just going to type in a bunch of prompts, I'm going to get end software, and I'm just going to directly ship this to the customer, right? I feel like it's best to just see AI as a tool to make people who are already great software engineers even better, right? The only problem there with the economics in a country like India is if you give the best software engineers these sort of tools, they will take away 10 roles of the junior folks, right? Because there's that much demand for at Indian prices in India. And if you give the top engineers the ability to do 10 projects at once because they're going much faster, they will swallow that opportunity, right? Which is not a bad thing. I think if you're a good engineer, this is the greatest time to be alive. I have a question.
That is the problem.
Yeah, I have a question.
That's the problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, why do you feel it's a problem?
No. Well, I feel like if the situation you're describing, which is like you're only going to need senior engineers who are already good, who can wield these tools, get 10x done, there's going to be no need for junior engineers coming in, then A, that sucks for the junior engineers who have spent a bunch of time studying, and B, it's there's not going to be a future generation of senior engineers. So it's like you risk losing this knowledge, because the way that you get good at engineering is you start as a junior engineer, you work with better people, and you learn. So I don't know. I when I think about this particular problem, I try not to think about it in terms of senior, junior. I tend to think about it in terms of like the people who are still going to have jobs as engineers are going to be ones who have like good, like critical thinking, problem solving skills, who understand computer systems, who are adaptable. Like this technology is changing every month or whatever. And so I hope it's not a junior senior divide, and it's more of like you can still come into this. And if you are someone who's coming out of school with a great CS education, is really smart and really fast at learning, you can still pick up these tools and be productive.
Yeah, I think it's a high agency versus low agency thing, right? It doesn't matter if you have 6 months of experience. If you're willing to go use a WAP, if you're willing to go like just sit and learn everything at the edge. If you're willing to experiment, build a bunch of things. Versus I know senior engineers were just like, AI sucks. Nobody uses AI.
Totally. Exactly.
And I'm
Like
just like,
that's a self-obsoleting point of view, in my opinion. You can't have that attitude towards it. And so yeah, it's like whoever's gonna be most adaptable and agency, I think that's the right way of putting it.
yeah. Talking about agency, can you give me a couple of counterintuitive insights that you figured out running a team and hiring people here versus at Google?
Yeah. So one counterintuitive thing that was very, very interesting is it's connected to what we were just talking about. Is like when we first started getting to a point where Warp was usable to build Warp, meaning like you get this like cool recursive loop of like you're using the tool you're building to build the tool itself. Our senior developers were super reluctant, and it was because they were like, the code that this thing produces is not good. I know how to do this better myself. I can do it faster myself. And so we actually had to do a thing where I was just like, no, you're going to try to use this. You're going to try to start every single coding task in Warp within Warp. You don't necessarily have to finish it within Warp. And then it's totally changed in the past 3 months, where some of the senior developers on our team have like gotten it and are like able to do like wield it in the same way that they could like were awesome at the terminal or awesome at Vim or whatever before. They're now awesome at using these agents. And so, I guess the sort of interesting thing for people who are running companies is like, you might have to force it a little. You might have to overcome these biases. You have to overcome this idea that these technologies are fixed at a point in time, because they're not. Like, you might have tried it 6 months ago and it did suck, and now you try it and you're like, what? It can do these magic things. So I think that's really, really that's really important as someone who's like running an engineering team.
Yeah. I want you to help me, sort of tell me where you think this industry is headed. Like, I just want a macro insight on AI, right? Because you know how it's going, how you've been a user of the model since the early days, right? You've seen it evolve. Do you think we're going to get AGI in a couple of years where, you press a button and things are done? Or do you feel like it's going slower than expected? Like, give me your updated beliefs, right? Because everyone's had different beliefs about this last year. Now we've seen another year play out. Every year we're gaining more information. How do you think the next few years are going to play out with respect to the base models?
So first of all, I don't know, but I'll give you my guess because I think it's more interesting to get a guess than not. It seems a little bit to me like the latest iterations of the models have been like slightly smaller incremental benefits than the prior ones. The story that I kind of see playing out is like, I do think the models will continue to improve. I don't know if what you'll see is like a exponential improvement, or you'll see something that looks more like an S curve, where you sort of, on whatever the current architecture is, start to see more diminishing returns. I think that's like the gazillion-dollar question, honestly, is like, is there some reinforcing loop in the model creation where you get to a point where these things continue at the rate they've been at, or do you see something that's more like an S curve where they start to asymptotically flatten out? If I had to bet, just based on what I'm seeing, it seems like the latest generation was like not as big of a step change. That said, I still think the other thing I think is like we're very, very early in the like rollout and adoption of like useful AI. It's very useful in coding. It's very useful in customer service. Is a second place where there's like a big product market fit. It's like there's this study that came out. It's like 95% of AI pilots at companies don't yield actual benefits. And so I think that the actual adoption and productization of AI for most things is just like way behind what the foundational technology would allow. So even if the models do slow down a bit, I still think that you're going to see a huge boom in AI products where like these things are productized in a useful way, because we're just starting that.
Got it. I have one last question for you, right? Which is, if you were to do the entire Warp journey again, what would you do differently?
Yeah, we spent too much time on our like kind of preconceived notion of what was going to make the business work, which was this collaboration platform. Again, if you're a founder, I think really important lesson is to like listen to the market. Don't get too anchored on your like, your biases going in. I wish we had gone all in on AI sooner, faster, harder, because we had like an amazing interface for doing something like Claude Code, but Claude Code beat us to market by like 3 months with our agentic thing. And like they have all other advantages too, just to be clear. But like we knew we wanted it, we were building it, and like had we started executing on it faster, we would be further along right now. Um, so I would say like don't be too precious about your ideas going in, and like I would have adjusted and gone harder on the area where there's more market pull faster if I had to do it again.
That's I think very good advice. I mean, as a founder, your job is to sort of pivot and identify opportunity and go there. But sometimes, when you're building a startup, you're always like, is this going to distract me going in this direction? Is AI really going to be a thing and whatnot? But I think you guys still stuck the landing, and it's very rare to see. And the reason I wanted to chat as well, it's very rare to see a company grow so quickly and be used by people all the way in my game dev team, which is like all the way across the world.
It's so, by the way, it's so cool for me to hear that. That's like,
I should have sent you a picture.
yeah, that's just like, that's the thing that gets me most excited about working on this at all, is like some person who I've never met in Bangalore on your team is like using the thing that like, 5 years ago was just like a Google Slides deck where we were like, we think people might want this. And so that's like the most fun part of actually being a founder, is hearing stuff like that. That's super cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for building it. I mean, if you've made our team a little more productive, you've saved me money, you've saved us time.
There we go.
You've brought things closer to market. So thank you so much for doing what you do. It matters.
Cool.
If you've ever had that question in your head, which is, why are we building this? Are we just building another B2B SaaS company? But actually it matters, right? And I try to tell founders, especially founders who, someone in the team or I'm using their products, I'm always like, don't stop doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, no, to me, like, this is why I think founding and being an entrepreneur is like the most fun thing and most satisfying thing. Cause like, it's a true test of whether or not, your thing only succeeds if it's actually useful. Like there's no cheating around it. There's no, like at Google, you kind of get promoted even if your project fails or whatever. If you're an entrepreneur, it has to, the only way that you succeed is if the thing is useful. And so I find it like to be such a fun challenge. And when it works, it's really awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, go check out WOP. And thank you, Zach, for your time.
Thanks, Varun. This was awesome.